My name's Emily Martin, and I'm taking you behind the scenes to talk to equine artists from around the world. This is Artist Unlocked. Don't mind my dog in the background, you might see him moving. Alright, what is up, you guys? It's been a few weeks. If you don't follow me on my Instagram, you may not know this, but basically 2 weeks ago I had a very sudden tragic death in my family, and I just needed to take a few weeks to reset a little bit and take some time to be with my family and just take some time to be off in general. So that is where I've been if you haven't been keeping up with me. I just want to say thank you to anyone who has reached out to me over Instagram or just asked if I was doing okay, how I was doing. It really means a lot. I really come to this hobby to escape everything that's going on in the world around us, and so that includes, tragic family matters. So I'm so thankful and grateful to be back. I think this will be a lovely use of my time while I continue to grieve and go through this loss. This week's episode features Kristen Taylor of Blue Mountain Stable. I want to clarify, it is stable, not stables. I made some Instagram posts featuring her and I said stables instead of stable, so sorry about that, Kristen. Kristen is a fellow YouTuber and an extremely talented and very polished artist in the hobby. One of the things that really stood out to me with her work is just how clean it is. Her whites are always very well finished and polished and opaque, and her prep work is amazing. I applaud her for that. I am still trying to build up patience for that process. As I mentioned before, she also is a YouTuber. She posts weekly tutorials, and she's actually been talked about a lot on this show so far, so I was really glad to be able to sit down with her and talk to her. I know a lot of hobbyists look up to her and use her YouTube channel as a good base for how to start their own work. Thank you so much, Kristen, for being on the show and for being patient. I know your episode didn't come out exactly when it was supposed to, but thank you for hanging in there with me. If this is your first time watching, definitely go ahead and check out the show. I not only have it on YouTube, which is likely what you're watching right now, but on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. There's 8 other episodes for you to watch for season 1, and I have a whole season 2 already planned, so there's lots of content to come. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. For those who don't know you, go ahead and just introduce yourself, what you do, how long you've been in the hobby, things like that.
Alrighty, well, so I've been in the hobby since about 2001. That's when I got my first Breyer horse. It was a Henry the Norwegian Fjord, which has one of my favorite ever breeds. And when we saw that come out from Breyer, my mom got that for me for Christmas, and it all went downhill ever since. Yeah, because that was back at the time when they still had little catalogs that came in the boxes, and so that's how I learned about JH Magazine and the whole rest of the hobby, and eventually got online and started searching out different things and found out about tack making and customizing. Tack making was actually one of the first things that I started out with, and then customizing kind of came shortly behind that. I'd say maybe 2003, 2004, and the customizing I've kept up with. The tack making's been a little bit off and on, but definitely going strong with the customizing.
Yeah, that's cool. It's interesting though, because I've had a few other people that I've interviewed that also started out with tack making, which is interesting to me because I also kind of dabbled in it for a little bit just because I was interested in performance showing. It's interesting how, because I think in some ways there's a lot of parallels between the two, as far as like the skills you learn and the dexterity I think that's required, especially because you do a lot of minis.
I know I torture myself with the smaller sizes.
Well, they're amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it probably comes pretty naturally for most people, because I know when I started out with it, I was still pretty young when I got my first horse, so it just was natural. I need tack to play with it. I can't ride if I don't have a saddle and all of that. So I would just grab scrap bits of things around the house and made these really terrible bridles and saddles, but that's what got me started.
That's amazing though. I'm sure they were better than even just like some of the earlier Breyer saddles though, because like I go back and I look at those and I would like beg my mom to buy me those tack sets. I thought they were like amazing.
Yeah.
And you go back and it's like the things that you think when you're younger.
Yeah, I kind of remember that a little bit too, and I think about what they cost at the time. I'm kind of glad my mom didn't either, because yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in some of my original attempts. Like, take that money and just give it to me as some nice leather, and there you go. That would have been amazing, because I didn't have real leather when I started.
Yeah. So take me along your journey then, as far as like an overall of the hobby. Like, you kind of went into a little bit like how you started collecting. Do you still collect now, or are you primarily doing customizing? What's kind of your journey into that realm been like?
So I would say that I'm still a little bit of a collector. I know starting out, I was definitely more OF, and I had not really a large collection, but for me at the time, that was the largest it ever was. It was a handful of horses, mostly traditional. I had some stablemates originally then too, and that's what kind of turned me on to the smaller sizes, especially as I started making tack for those when I was in college. It kind of clicked for me that I liked working with the smaller scales as a tack maker, and started focusing a little more on that as a collector as well. My customizing started getting better around college too, because I was going for school for communications and art, and it was the art side of it that made me realize I could actually maybe do decently with the customs, and I really liked the challenge of the minis, so it became very natural to go into the mini customs, so much so that eventually I just kind of abandoned the tack because it was taking up more of my time. And that started to eventually change how my hobby goals as a whole went through. So it became less about focusing on collecting original finished briars and more about what I could do on a customizing standpoint. I kind of feel like I'm not as much of a collector anymore, because I've kind of had to pull away from it just because of the size of them. I like to keep my collection really small, like around 30 horses, especially if it's mini, because I've moved a few times in my adult life, and it really sucks trying to move a whole bunch of traditional horses. So
Yeah.
I've really downsized to something that I can pack really easily, just one little box, and throw it in the back of the car. And that's kind of where I'd like to keep it now.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all for that. I feel like I'm in a similar position. I like the traditionals, but I also have been getting into minis, or like the sort of curio scale lately, because I feel like that scale kind of has a little bit of the best of both worlds. I have like a small collection of just like either things that, you know, my grandmother gave me because she was into horses, or just like really sentimental ones, but like
Yeah.
I'm definitely not as much of a collector as I used to be.
It's especially tough when you have relatives in it. For the traditionals, I know some of those came from my mom, and even my husband got a couple for me too. And I really don't want to get rid of those, because those were picked out by family members that I hold dear to me, but at the same time, they're big. So all the other horses that I've bought in the past, those I'm trying to slowly rehome just to get it down to just a few nice traditionals. And then it's tough when Breyer comes out with all these really nice, like eperal horses, or some of these new sculptures. Like, oh, I don't even want to see the Kaylee Park sculpture. I know it's going to be so tempting.
I know. It's going to ruin me.
So I'm glad they're shrinking things down, because that's the only thing that's going to save me. I can get a mini Croy. I just can't have the big Croy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's quite the mini craze going on right now, which I kind of appreciate. So then, as you got into the customizing realm of things, how did you start with that? What mediums did you start with? What was your journey?
I started with acrylics and pastels, especially since a couple of the articles that I read back in JH were very focused on pastels. So I had step-by-steps to help me walk through that. And when I was doing those, I was still pretty young. I knew a little bit about art, but I didn't have any proper education. So if I had an article that said, here's how to do it step by step, that was amazing. So that was my first foray. As I got older and more experienced with different mediums, I started to like the acrylics best and got into airbrushing, and that's been my main focus ever since, because I've been able to get the effects that I want from airbrushing, to get the nice smooth blends and the richness of color and all the different kind of paint options that are available now, like all of these interference colors and metallics. You can create some really rich and interesting airbrush pieces now that used to be you could only really get that effect out of oils. So it kind of comes back to, it's another challenging thing for me, is to kind of see what I can do with airbrush.
What would be your like favorite or least favorite part about airbrushing?
Oh, I think the layering and the detail abilities you can do, especially when you get yourself a good brush and a couple different needle options, that's exciting. So that's definitely one of my favorite aspects. Least favorite is the finickiness of it, just the learning curve to be able to get it to do exactly what you want it to do, and the constant cleaning that's involved with it.
Mm.
Especially for me, I live in a really dry area. I kind of laugh about it because on average, our dryness is about 2 degrees drier than the average dryness of the Sahara Desert. That's how bad it is out here.
Oh.
Yeah, we're usually about 18 to 19% humidity, and it wreaks havoc on an airbrush. So I'm always out there with the humidifier on, and it's too small for the room that I'm in. I'm constantly having to soak and clean out my brush about every 15 minutes because it clogs up.
Oh man.
It's a wonderful process when it finally works and you get to say I made that, but trying to get it to that process is very frustrating.
Yeah, it's definitely hard when you, especially like, I'll be in like the best mood and wanting to paint or sculpt or whatever, and then if something like goes wrong in the technical side of it, it just kills the whole thing, and I'm just like, why do I even do this?
I know, especially if it's at the last minute, trying to seal them or varnish them, and they crackle because it's so dry. Like, I put so much time into this, and then you crack at the last minute. Why?
Yeah, that is the most discouraging thing, I think, out of all the things that could go wrong, is that you get to the very end, and then you have to start from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. And if it means stripping something like a Pinto or an Appaloosa. So there's a great deal of relief when I seal it, and it finally cures, and everything went well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know, at least me personally, I watch your YouTube videos, so I kind of have a window into the workspace that you have. I know some artists start and continue to be, at the kitchen table, and that's their workspace, and then others have like a dedicated studio. So have you always had that space, or what's the progression been with that?
I actually haven't, and much to the dismay of my parents, my studio for the longest time when I was living with them was the kitchen table or my bedroom. Yeah, I did not have ideal working spaces when I first started out in customizing. I have to airbrush in the house because it was just too dusty or windy outside for me to be able to do it there, which is not what I recommend because of the paint fumes stirred up by an airbrush. It's not good to have in the house, but that's what I had to deal with. When I moved out and got my own life, it was a little better, but I was still working either my bedroom or my living room. It didn't have a dedicated studio space. It would just kind of make it up as I go, put it up and put it away later. I did have an actual desk with me, but that was about it. Then when I met my husband and we moved in, finally able to have a little bit of a space, the office, we split it into half office and the other half of it was my studio. Garage became the airbrush place. So at least I had an indoor environment at that point where I didn't have the wind blowing into my stuff that also kept the fumes away from the rest of the house. Then when we finally moved from there, that's when I got an actual bedroom just for my studio, and then the garage was the airbrushing station. So it hasn't been until about the last year and a half, maybe 2, that I finally have had a dedicated space, and I've been doing this for, was it 16, 17 years now?
So you finally got there, right?
Yes. So for anyone that feels like their studio space is just not ideal, hang in there. Eventually it will get there.
So true. Yeah, one of the concerns that I kind of had with delving into airbrushing is I do still live at home with my parents, and my studio is just a desk in my room, and so I kind of worry about the fumes. I don't know if like maybe an airbrush hood would get rid of that kind of danger. They do make boxes for that are supposed to actually suck out the fumes, and then you just have it venting out through a window. Mm-hmm. That might be the next best. I know my husband was trying to build one for me that I could have out in the garage, and it wouldn't even fume up the garage. That's one of his many to-do projects, though. I know that they're also made as kits that you just kind of put it together, or they're ready to go and you just install it, and that might be an option for some people too, starting out. Yeah. Well, awesome. I think that's super cool that you have a space now that you get to work in. Do you notice like a huge difference in the way that you're able to work having that space?
It is really nice, especially since I have animals. I can start a project, and if I needed to walk away and just come back to it the next couple of days, I can leave it in there and just shut the door and not have to actually put everything completely away and have it nice and tidy. I can let it be a little messy and come back to it a few days later and know that the animals can't get to it. I'm sure
that especially is helpful because you don't have to constantly put it away, which I also feel like it's nice when you don't have to put it away. You I find myself at least picking it up for shorter periods of time, and so I actually am able to make more progress on things because it's like less of a
Yes.
process to just get it all out.
Well, and you're more likely to come back to it too if you know it's just sitting there ready and you just got to go grab your paintbrush or a pencil, as opposed to, oh, I have to go in the closet, I have to pull everything out, I got to get everything set up. It's going to take me 30 minutes to set up and then I can start it. It's a lot more
Right.
discouraging.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite tools? And this could be as it pertains to painting or sculpting or just in general for the artistry side of things.
I think I would say I have a few. So definitely my airbrush, particularly the one I have now, because I've gone through a number of airbrushes over the years. Kind of started out thinking I want to find just something cheap to get me by and see if I'm going to like this, and quickly found out that the cheap airbrushes are also the fastest to break.
Yeah.
So now that I finally got one that behaves the way I need it and holds up, it's amazing. It's actually enjoyable to go use my airbrush now. I really like my Dremel because that makes it so much easier to reposition horses now. I used to try to do it with either little hand saws or X-Acto knife of all things.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, that really slows your process down when you're trying to do that
Yeah.
carefully. Another thing I discovered recently too were sanding sticks. And they come in a couple different little grits. So those have been so handy during prepping, especially the smaller little horses, to try and get into some of the trickier little spots. Like the Briar stablemate rivet, I used to really hate prepping that thing because it was so hard to get in and around the neck and his shoulder, since he's kind of
Yes.
turned in on himself. But those little sticks are just really easy to stick in there and then sand the seams right across his shoulder that his head kind of covers up. So those have been a dream. My last favorite tool would be my clay shapers. I used to use little blunt objects like toothpicks, whatever I could find, to detail and shape my clay, but those things are really great because they're slightly bendable, so you get the nice fine tip like a toothpick, but if you need to angle it and really move a piece of the clay to the side, they're really good for that. They're very versatile.
Yeah, those are a huge help. I know they have increased in popularity over the last couple of years because I think the word has gotten out that those are like kind of the it tool for sculpting.
The
But
secret's out, yep.
yeah, they make a huge difference for sure.
Yeah, and they're so cheap and easy to get. I've been seeing them more at places like Hobby Lobby. I'm like, finally, I can find these things.
Yeah, you don't have to order it from an obscure store far away.
Yeah, and then hope you got the right size because you got it offline.
Yes. Oh, that's happened to me before. I thought it actually happened to me with the clay shapers. I thought I was buying like a set that were smaller than they were, and it came with like two gigumongous ones. Like,
Oh no.
like I actually I actually used the end of them to like help scrape the epoxy out of the jars because like
Oh, there you go.
I hate that feeling of like the clay getting under your nails when you try to
Yeah.
like scoop it out. So that's what their use is now.
Oh, I'm glad you're able to use them for something.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite or a least favorite scale to work in?
I think the favorite would definitely be the stablemate. So anything like that 1/32 to 1/24 is definitely my comfort zone. I haven't tried micro much outside of just prepping the one that I have and a little bit of sculpting. So not sure on that one if it's going to be favorite or least favorite yet. I think what I can say for least favorite though is traditional. Oddly enough, I thought that was going to be easier for me since I work so tiny that I could just jump into the bigger ones. But the techniques and just working with those larger sizes is not as easy for some strange reason.
Yeah, and I think they can be more daunting too, just because they take longer to complete. And I always get anxious, especially from a sculpting standpoint, about, you can do whatever you can, but I always feel like they're a little more fragile.
The weight on them, yes.
Yeah.
I struggled a lot with that with my lady phase, especially with her legs. It took me a while to try to find some nice wire that was strong enough for her armature since I had to completely rebuild her basically. And the epoxy was getting pretty heavy. So if it wasn't for that, oh gosh.
Yeah, that's another thing I run into. I'm like, does everyone that sculpts with epoxy, like doing drastic customs, are they all this heavy? Because it's like, I always feel like they're somehow way too heavy, even though I'm not putting like a ton of clay on them.
Yeah, it's just something about, I don't know about Magic Sculpt since I haven't done much with it, but I know for sure the Aves, it's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You redo your shoulders, you redo a haunch, and it kind of feels like you just stuck a rock in the middle of the thing.
Yeah. So I guess pivoting away from the studio side of things for a little bit, what would you say, and you don't have to necessarily say a least favorite. I know some people have just kind of said they don't feel like there is a least favorite aspect, but what would your favorite or least favorite aspect of the hobby be overall? And this could be unrelated to the art side.
I think for me, it would probably be more the connectivity of it because of the fact that I'm a bit remote. I know Colorado's kind of getting more of a bigger hobby circuit, but it's mostly still pretty centralized around Denver, which for the longest time, Denver was 3 hours away from me. So there was all the stuff going on when I was starting out in the hobby that I just could not get to because it took too long just to get there. And even now, it's still about an hour, hour and a half, depending on where it is. And if it's closer to the Boulder area, well, that's again talking about a 2-hour drive just to get there. So it kind of feels like I don't have as much connectivity to the hobby as far as the interpersonal because there's just not a whole lot going on outside of it. We've got one woman that's trying to do things a little more in the Colorado Springs and Divide area, and thank goodness, because that's given me something that's a little closer. But outside of that and before her, there really wasn't much of anything.
Yeah, that's a huge bummer because if you want to go out and do shows and stuff, you feel like you have to either hop on a plane or go on a big long road trip. So if you want to just kind of make a quick weekend out of it, yeah, for sure.
And that gets kind of trickier too when you have to plan other people's weekends or other plans or trying to get a hotel, something that used to be just really quick that I could pop up to and just visit. It now becomes, hey babe, do you want to set aside the weekend? Let's get an Airbnb.
Yeah. Yeah, there's more of a process now.
Yeah, it's not as simple.
Do you have any best moments, memories, things that have happened over your hobby journey so far that are just things that you'll always remember?
Well, so I think one of them would be back when I attended Spring of a Thing. That was my first show that I had some of my own work there, and actually like my first decent little show string of customs. And it was my first champion. And it was actually all scale, so it wasn't just the minis, and it was one of my winnies that won. So that was kind of a fascinating moment for me because at that point I had never won a champion at a live show before. To the point that when I heard my horse's name and my name come over the loudspeaker, I'm like, wait, what? I actually won something. I made it, Mom, I made it. So
right.
That was definitely a high moment for me.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think after that, it would be the fact that I have a family that's been very supportive of this hobby. So I either get to enjoy live shows going out with my husband, or sometimes it's my mom, and they'll kind of take turns. And that's been great for me to go with them and share that side of my life with them and to see their enthusiasm that they hold for it too.
Yeah, that's awesome that you have such a good support system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my husband especially has been really great at it when it comes to the customizing side, finding little things that can help, like building the airbrush box or getting me the airbrush. It's like this has been amazing.
Aw, yeah, that's so great that he's so supportive of it too. I know, like, it's funny to see people bringing their significant others into it because just of how, it's funny to me, first of all, how, like, it must appear to them.
At first, yeah. They walk in, they see this little head on the table or something, like, trust me, it's gonna be beautiful. I know it looks macabre right now.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing at first to be like, don't worry, it'll be fine.
I know it was a little bit of an anxiety for me the first time I went to a show with him. We were still dating at the time. And I couldn't quite get it across to him that, look, we're really serious about this. You know how people are really serious about video games and the games that you play in? Take that, but apply it to model horses. And I tell you, when you come up here, you're going to see it. Big show strings, and these are really amazing pieces that are better than anything you've ever seen me make. And I don't think it really hit him until he was there the day of the show. Go, oh, yeah, she wasn't kidding.
Yeah, I just brought my boyfriend to a show last September. And yeah, it was the exact same experience. I just kind of wanted to like walk him around everywhere and be like, see, look at how amazing this is. It's not just me sitting in my room doing this.
Has he asked you anything like, so how does this work, or the difference between breeds and how they win?
I think He asks me only if if it's like prompted. Like if I'm showing him something I'm doing and then he's like, "Oh, okay, well then what does that mean?" So then I'll explain it to him. So he's like slowly accruing like a small vocabulary of horse things.
Oh. I feel like my guy is finally starting to get it because he didn't grasp the judging process. Well, because he's also never seen real horse shows or how that works. So I'm trying to explain to him, it's like that, but then you have to factor in the different breeds and different scales. So here's the other things that they look for. Damn, it all just look the same.
Yeah.
I think it's finally starting to settle in because he said Rapiceno one day. And when I asked him, wait, do you know what that means? And like, explain it to me. It's like, well, it's the one with a little funny white ticking on the side of the barrel, right? I'm like, yes. He is listening.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cute. Do you have any tips for young artists that are looking to get into airbrushing, get into the artistry side of the hobby? What would your tips be for them?
I think my biggest, like, top 2 tips would be definitely explore. Explore as many different things as you possibly can. Like, if you think you're interested in airbrushing, give that a try, but then also look at other different mediums. And if something doesn't seem like it's going quite right, explore different options to maybe make it better so that you can kind of get a little bit better feel for either what is working or what's not working. And then on that similar note, don't give up. Don't just get discouraged. Always stick with it. Sort of be a fearless customizer. If something's frustrating or doesn't go the way you want it to go, that's okay. That's totally normal. It's part of the artistic learning process. It doesn't mean that you're a failure or that it's never going to be good. Just take a moment to take a break from it if you need to, but always come back and give it your best and keep coming back, because eventually you'll find the thing that works perfectly for you and you'll find your groove, and then your work will start to get better. I think that's the biggest thing, is just stick with it.
Yeah, I think that would be my top advice as well. You really have to push through the ugly phase. And while you know, I have like a bunch of models. I don't even know if I have them anymore, but like when I was first attempting like sculpting necks or I cringe.
My first sculpting attempts were pretty frustrating because I didn't have the right materials. I didn't know about epoxy putty till a little bit later. I was buying air dry clays, which were really difficult to shape and almost impossible to detail, and then they shrank when they cured.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, where the fearlessness comes in, is to just get through those frustrating stages and keep coming back. Because if I had given up on that and just said, well, I guess sculpting isn't for me, I wouldn't have discovered the epoxy putties and realized, oh, it wasn't really just me. It was more that I was using the wrong material. And once I got the right material, I need a little practice. And then finally, I'm making things that I want.
Yeah, so true. That can be half the battle sometimes. That actually happened to me, oddly enough, with video editing. I started off with like Windows Movie Maker.
Oh no.
And it would crash every like 2 seconds. So I was like, I hate this. Editing's not for me. It's too tedious. It never works. And then, once I had the right tools in hand, it was so much better.
Oh yes. Yep. Definitely.
This is kind of a big question, but what's one thing you'd like to see more of in the hobby?
I think definitely minis, although that's getting better. There's more people that are doing either custom minis or artist resins, and now micros have just completely exploded, which is amazing to see. But I think the last thing that I haven't seen a whole lot is mini performance. Either horses made with that intention, so they're more performance friendly, or people actually doing more. Like, there's not a whole lot of people that show mini. And there's a few people that come off to mind, like Leia Coper is one that does a lot of minis on a higher level because she takes them to Briarfest. But there's not a ton of tack makers. I can only think off right hand one that I know is taking commissions, and is it Anna Kirby now, or is it Anna Helt? I can never remember.
I know who you're talking about. Isn't it like Dream
Flight Design? Yes, I just can't remember what her last name is now. But yeah, outside of that, if you really want to get into mini performance, you kind of have to do it yourself or wait for a commission spot to open up. There's just not a whole lot of choices. So I'd love to see more open up in that.
Yeah, I agree. That would be really nice to see. I think people get intimidated by minis just because of how small they are and how intricate everything has to be, and you have to have a lot of dexterity to work with them.
Yeah, and then there's a certain level of detail that you need to maintain in them too to be competitive with the traditionals, because they show with traditionals right now. It's not like the artist resins and customs division where they break out mini now, so you actually have a chance of showing well with your mini without having to go up against larger ones. We're not there yet with performance.
Yeah, totally agree. Overall, what does the hobby mean to you?
For me, it's a thing of enjoyment. So it's lets me kind of just set aside the busyness of life, or especially with work, and then go into my studio and just do something that I enjoy and to get to chillax and change my mindset for a moment, but also still get to do something creative. Since my actual profession is very creative based, it's nice to be able to step away from something that's all commercial and about selling a product or a service and get to do art for art's sake and get to see where I take it without having to worry about a boss or a client saying, well, we need it to do this and it needs to have a certain colors. I have a free reign from that. And then sort of the going to the shows and seeing other people's interpretations of that and the social aspect of getting to share the fact that we all love the artistic side of it, or we all love horses.
Yeah, it's such a different hobby from, any kind of mainstream, and it's so niche, and I think that kind of helps. It really is like an escape, I think, for a lot of people from their busy lives, and it is nice to, like, I know a lot of people don't take commissions for the reason of they don't want like the added pressure, because then once it becomes work to a certain point, it's not as fun anymore because it becomes an obligation. So doing art for art's sake is definitely super refreshing.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, I feel for them there, because I've had a few people ask if you take commissions. Like, oh, I do really want to. That means deadlines and working on time, and I have so little of it already.
Yeah, so true. That's what I battle with right now, being in college. I graduate in the fall, hopefully, fingers crossed. It's so hard to balance the time.
Well, especially as a college student, gosh, I think that was probably some of my busiest years. The fact that you're able to customize it all right now is quite an achievement.
Oh, well, thank you. I try. I took a break for a little while there. I started my account, I think, back in 2015, I want to say. And I started it not to customize. I started it to get into like some giveaway. And I discovered like the hobby, the art side from there, and I kind of tried things. But then once I got into college, I was like, I do not have time for this. I still love it, but I don't have time. So I took like a two-ish year break, and I feel like I'm in the home stretch now of college, so I can kind of juggle it hopefully a little more. But
get to step back into it. Well, that's what's kind of nice about this hobby too, is it does do pretty well for taking a break and then coming back where you picked up. It never completely goes away.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people kind of do what I've done too. It is like you get into kind of that really busy phase of your life, and people do the same thing. I think a lot of times when they have kids, life just picks up naturally. What are your future goals as far as customizing or just in the hobby in general? Do you want to show more? What are your goals?
Definitely hoping to show more. It used to be one show every couple of years, and started getting up to about 1 or 2 shows every year until all this fun recent COVID stuff hit, and now it's back to 0. But when those get back up going, I hope I can still kind of keep up with the 1 to 2, because it's a nice way to debut new work and keep things fresh, kind of see where I'm doing as far as my skill set, skill level, because I can get critique from judges who are often other times big name artists in the hobby as well. So the best people to get some feedback on it, because they're doing the work that I aspire to. So I hope to keep up with that. And then I think I keep going back and forth on whether or not I want to return to tack making, especially the mini scale, because there were some enjoyable aspects to that. Then finally, my last thing is I want to do a little more of original sculptures. I dabbled in it a little bit some years ago before I really knew what I was doing. And now that I've learned more about anatomy and biomechanics and how a horse actually looks from the drastic customizing, I kind of want to dive back into original sculpture and see if that's something that I could finally do well.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Definitely something to watch for. I think original sculptures as a whole, it's such a people that don't do it, I don't think realize how much of a leap it really is from even just doing dress set customs where everything is resculpted, because even then you kind of have the base model as your armature, and creating that armature is like half the battle, I feel.
Oh yeah, well, because the basic mass and then the basic proportions are already there if you're starting off of a briar, even if you're dremeling most of it down. Now you have to make all of that from scratch, and that's one of the things, if you're just a little bit off on it, people are going to notice.
Yep, so true. I want to turn this last little bit over to you to kind of plug your work. What are, your social medias, website, things that you want people to check out and be on the lookout for?
Well, so there's sort of two aspects to the body of work that I do. One is the customs itself, mostly the mini scale customs and some a little bit on the larger end. So for that, I have my website and my social media. It's all under bluemountainstable.com. And then there's the Instagram and the Facebook are all connected to that. And they're all under the hashtag or handle Blue Mountain Stable. Then the other half of it is the tutorials that I do. Some of the tips I feature pretty regularly are either on the Instagram or the Facebook page, but then I have the whole YouTube YouTube channel that I dedicate to tutorials, and that is also Blue Mountain Stable under there under YouTube. I try to do those about weekly. Sometimes it ends up being a couple times a month, depending on how busy my life gets, but my main focus is really to try to make the customizing side of the hobby more approachable to either beginners or intermediates or even slightly advanced people, so that you can start diving into something that if you're interested in it, or if you're somebody that's a little more advanced, maybe learn some new tricks or tips based on the stuff that I do.
Yeah, I think it's working, because I've actually had several people that I've either already interviewed for this show or just people that I talk to in general in the hobby. They talk about your videos, so they're definitely
really?
Yeah, they're super helpful. I think the fact that one of the things I really appreciate about the videos that you create is how clear and concise you're able to sort of lay out the process. And I know that comes from your own trial and error, and you figure out something that you like, and so then you're able to kind of consolidate it. But I think your tutorials they're always very clear. You can see everything that's going on, and you always list the materials and things that you use too, which I think is super helpful for people that are looking to start out.
Well, that's definitely a communications background part of me coming through. Like, people, get to the point, just show me everything I need to do so I can actually sit down and do it. Because I've gone through the process. Because when I started out, there wasn't a whole lot. Like, DJB wasn't on the circuit at the time. She was one of the first that when she did come on there that put together something that was nice. Like, okay, good. Finally, some tutorials that show people how to walk them through that actually have a chance of coming out of it with an end result that's decent. So definitely it's like thinking, why don't I approach this like I do for my full-time job and sit down and actually write this out and put it together like it's a professional video, but now it's actually for the tutorials. So hopefully that makes things much easier for people than when I started out trying to figure this out piecemeal from little bits of things through the internet or websites.
Yeah.
It gives them a better adventure than what I had.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I actually did have a question about your channel, if you don't mind me deviating for a minute.
Oh no, go ahead.
So you kind of mentioned it's your communications background talking. When you're creating those videos, what's your process for that? How much of it do you map out, and how much of it do you kind of just let flow?
I usually do what we call the map out process, because I'm not usually the best speaker or doing things on the fly. Even though I tried to do some public speaking when I was younger, I kind of learned, I can do this, but it's not the best. And for me, my strengths have always been written communication behind the verbal, and then the absolute strongest is visual. So for me, I need to sit down and actually draw out and sketch out what it is that I want to do and write out what I plan to do. So starting out with scripts that detail exactly what I'm going to say and make notes about what kind of clips I need, it's much, much easier for me to put together a final polished piece that sounds much better than if I just turned on the camera and started customizing and trying to talk to people through it at the same time. I know there's people that can do that pretty well, but I am not one of them. I need to have it scripted.
Yeah, so you basically storyboard it all out, and then you go through the filming process.
Yep. And it's also been really helpful for me too to make sure that I don't miss any parts of the process or key things that people need to see. I can catch that before I even actually go into filming it, because I can see it on the script.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I think
obviously, like you said, different people kind of do it differently, but I think there is definitely something to be said for a certain degree of mapping it out and planning it, because I think that definitely comes through with your videos.
Yeah. It certainly kind of lengthens the process. It's partly why I'm not always the fastest at getting things cranked out, but when I do get it done, it's much better than if I had just winged it.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly post, I think, frequently enough for most people. I know I definitely could not handle that load right now.
Well, part of my little trick is I'll pick some easier videos and try to knock them out together at the same time, try to get them all filmed in one weekend, get the voiceovers in another weekend, and get them all stitched and scheduled out. If it wasn't for scheduling things out, that channel would not be as good as it is now.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful to plan things out way in advance, or as much in advance as you can. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun and exciting to share bits of my process and get to hear a little of yours as well.
Alright guys, that was the episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely go ahead and check out Kristen. I will have all of her links listed below in the description for you guys to check out. If you're interested in getting a more behind the scenes look on the show, definitely go ahead and check out my Instagram. It's Frost Studios Equine Art. Lots of exciting things coming down the pipe for season 2 as well. And of course, next week is our season 1 finale. Speaking of the finale, next week's episode will feature Rayvin Maddock of Khrysalis Studios. Rayvin is one of my all-time top favorite artists. My first artist resin was from her. It was the Giordi Fjord resin, and so I'm a longtime follower and fan of her, and so I was extremely honored to be able to sit down and talk to her. Her episode is extremely heartfelt, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week for the season 1 finale of Artist Unlocked.